we're talking about getting the most out of your raw images using DxO PhotoLab. We're going to be talking a bit about PhotoLab's 50,000 plus camera and lens combinations, the profiles that they have for those camera and lens combinations, and how that helps to make your images better without you having to do anything at all. We're going to look at noise and color issues. I have one very high ISO image where we're going to do a bit of extra noise cleanup on there. We're going to do a little purple defringing on one of the photos. You're going to see some pretty advanced corrective work in there. Bringing out details in your highlights and shadows. We're going to basically, again, just make the most out of every photo. So with that all said, let's get this thing started here today. All right, so here's the 4 photos that we're going to work with. These are representative of different types of photography to some degree and different cameras. So let's see, this was shot on a Canon. Let's actually pull up the metadata on this. Here we go. This is a 5D Mark II. This is a pretty old photo. Actually almost a full decade old, back in 2010. So that's off of a Canon 5D Mark II. This one here, this is actually a commercial job that I did for Mercedes, a social media project. And this one is shot on a Olympus EM5. So one of the earlier Micro Four Thirds cameras, kind of a fun story there. This one is quite a bit newer. This is shot off of a Panasonic Lumix S1R. So it's a super high resolution image, 50 odd megapixel. We're going to play with that one. And then this one here is also from a Lumix. This is from an S1, pretty high res as well. And this one is particularly high ISO. You see ISO 51,000 in here. There's a lot of things wrong with this photo, and we're going to do our best to fix these up. So with all that said, I'm going to start with this picture here. And the first thing that I want to show you is what has already happened automatically. Now, for those of you who are already familiar with PhotoLab, you know that when you first load it up, first load up a photo, it loads up what's called a standard DxO standard profile. And that's what we're looking at here. And this DxO standard profile actually has a lot of stuff done to it already. There's white balance correction possibly done. There's smart lighting possibly done. And I say possibly because every image is unique. The software will automatically look at the photo and decide if noise reduction should be applied, cropping, and the cropping that would be applied would be because of distortion that might happen because of lens correction. There's the smart lighting again. We're seeing some repeats in here. Vignetting, now this is not creative vignetting, but corrective vignetting, where it will automatically de-vignette the edge of an image if it was getting some vignetting from a lens. Let's see here, color rendering. It's going to automatically do some color rendering. It is going to, let's see, automatically noise reduction. We see some repeats in here just because of the way that this is laid out. Automatic lens sharpness. So this is something that's automatically applied based off of the camera profile. Chromatic aberration that's automatically corrected. Cropping, which is again applied to remove any kind of strange edges of the image that might happen because of the lens distortion correction. And I think that's everything in there. So effectively what happens whenever you first open a photo in PhotoLab is you get this DxO standard. Now, if I go over to no correction, you'll see what the image looked like essentially as it came out of the camera. And for this particular photo, there's not a massive amount of change that's happening in here. There's a little bit of distortion that's happening. If I do a compare, you can see the difference in there. And that's the original, and that is the corrected image. And so this, again, is completely automatic. This is something that happens on import. And if you don't want that to happen on import, you can actually change that. If you go into the PhotoLab preferences, you have in here the default preset. It's by default, it's going to be set to standard, but you can say, no, don't do that. Just give me the image with no correction. I'll do everything on my own. But if you leave it to DxO standard, then the default image is going to be that slightly corrected image. And the important point about this, what was listed in the description here of how PhotoLab's 50,000 plus camera and lens combinations can make instant corrections, this is what we're talking about right here. Many cameras and lenses have been combined, been tested in the DxO labs to create a unique profile that is applied to that image on download. And you actually will see this if you go to your DxO modules. You can go to the manager and you can see in here, let's see, let me show only installed modules. you can see all the modules that I have installed. So I said this was a 5D Mark II. Is that what I said this was? Yep, 5D Mark II. And let's see, this lens is we can see it over here, the 70-200 f4. So there is the module that is being used right now. Now the software automatically downloads the modules that are needed, so you don't fill up your hard drive with modules that aren't needed. And if at any time you need to manually download one or you want to delete one or something, you can do that from here. These are tiny files. There's no real need to delete them. But if one is missing, the software should automatically prompt you to download it. But from here, you can see all the different modules that are available. So if you shoot with a Konica Minolta D-Image A2, you can see that. You can see the different Olympus cameras in here that are supported and all the possible lens combinations, of which there are many. Even with, this is really interesting, even combinations with different branded lenses. So this is an Olympus body with a Panasonic lens because they share a common micro four thirds mount. You'll see stuff like this in here that's just incredible. And again, there's no need for you to actually dig into this. This all happens automatically, but that is a huge part of the beginning of the process. Okay, so all that said, let's get into working on this photo. At first glance, I mean, the photo looks pretty good, right? There's not really a whole lot wrong with it, if anything. But I think that we can do some work to make it even better. The first thing that jumps out at me is the white balance. It feels quite warm, and it's interesting because I remember when I shot this, I deliberately manually white balanced this to make it a little bit more warm. So let's go over here to the white balance setting, and we see it says it's currently set to as shot. And I'm looking at the temperature, and it's just a temperature of 12,900, which is just ridiculous. I mean, that is massively high. So what should it have been? Well, this is clearly not in full sun, so probably shade. Let's go ahead and just set this manually to shade and see what the image looks like. Yeah, it's cold, right? This just doesn't feel good. And this is technically a correct shade white balance. Well, let's do this. Let's do a manual white balance based off of something that's neutral. Now, I clearly don't have a gray card in here to balance this off of, but I'm going to go off of these rocks. I'm going to assume these rocks are pretty neutral. Click on that, do a white balance sample off of there, see what that looks like. And, you know, that's it's close to what we had in the beginning. If I toggle this back to the original, I actually kind of like what I had done in camera better. So let me go back to as shot and let it go back to that warmth. And maybe I want to take a manual adjustment, just cool it down a tiny bit, but not much, because I do kind of like that artificial warmth in there. So I'm just gonna go with that. The next thing that I'm noticing is up here, there's this one hot spot in the trees where the sun was coming through. So clearly this part of the scene, the majority of the scene, was a bit darker than this spot up here. The sun was blasting right onto those leaves in there. The rest of it's in the shade. And unfortunately, that means that I've clipped out some details in there. So let's find out if there's any data in here that I can recover. This is something that I find to be a very important part of doing any raw processing, is to look at the photo and determine whether something that I'm trying to save is even savable. So the question is there detail in here? And for me, the quickest way to find that out is to not try to recover it, but to simply go to the exposure slider and just crank it. Just take it way down or way up if you're looking at shadow areas and see what detail is there. So by doing that, I can tell that there is some detail. It's a little bit out of focus because it's so far away. That's fine, but there is good solid color. There's definitely a few peaks in here, but of blown out data. But there's at least color in here. So maybe I'm not going to get massive detail back, but I do know that I can get color back, as opposed to if I reset this the way that it was right now, which is pretty much completely blown out. So this is good to know. This is good to keep in mind, and I will keep that in mind as I move forward and I get to a point where I might want to try to correct for that. If, for example, let's just say this was totally blown out, I couldn't do anything about it, I'd probably just crop it out. That would be my approach, would just be to crop that out of there. But I can probably get something out of it. Okay, so looking at the image again, let's look at our black and white levels. I'm looking at the histogram. I can see that my black levels are not quite to black. So if the bottom of this mountain was all the way up against the wall, I would know that my blacks are truly black. And by looking at the right-hand side, looking at the white side, I can see that I am clipping some data, but we already know what that is. That's this right here. So for the most part, the majority of the image is very nicely in range. I could lower my black point a little bit. So there's a few ways to go about doing this. Let's just try taking my black point slider. So go to my selective tones here and take the black point and simply lower that a little bit. And as I'm lowering that, let me actually collapse some of these so we can see the histogram. I'm working on a pretty relatively low resolution screen, so sometimes we need to collapse menu so we can see the histogram at the same time. Let's just bring that down a little bit. And there we go, we can see that now is meeting that level. The blacks look a lot nicer. You know what I'm gonna do actually is I'm gonna take this histogram and I'm gonna move it over here. It's kind of a cool thing that you can do and rearrange your UI so it fits your own workflow. So that works better for me. Stick the histogram over there. Okay, so back to the blacks. As I bring that back up, let me just reset that. Watch the histogram. We can see the big gap in here, but let's go back into here and pull this down a little bit. Get the blacks down to the black point. And if I really want to make sure that I'm not clipping any shadows, I could enable my shadow and highlight clipping. We can see I am clipping highlights. We already know that, so I'll just ignore that for now. But let's go ahead and take that black point, bring it down. Maybe I bring it down to the point where it starts to clip. So now these little indicators here tell me that I am clipping. And let's bring that back up again until it's not clipping. And now the image already looks a lot better. It's just got that extra contrast kick to it. So all that it needed to bring contrast back in was to bring that black point down a little bit. Now, I do feel like there could be some contrast within the scene itself, not just the black and white points, but within the details of the leaves. So I'm going to go to my contrast slider and not use the main contrast slider, but use the micro contrast. The micro contrast, let's go ahead and turn off our clipping indicator here. Our micro contrast is going to add some detail into the texture areas of the image. If you look now at the rocks especially, but also in the leaves in there, and I'll drag this back and forth here, you can really see a difference in the micro contrast in the structure, if you will, of that image. And if I just toggle that on and off, you can really see that in there. Now I've kind of cranked it up too high, so let me bring it down a little bit, but I love that I can bring in some detail in there by just bringing up that micro contrast slider. And one of the side effects of adjusting micro contrast is I will often get undersaturated. I will undersaturate the image. That's kind of what's happened here. So let's bring some saturation back in. Color accentuation, saturation, let's bring that up a bit, and it's already getting better. Now the oranges and the reds have saturated nicely. The greens kind of feel like I'm missing some green in here. So I think what I'll do is go to the new HSL tool. Here we go, the HSL, that's hue, saturation, luminance. Go to my greens in here, and let's take that saturation up just on the greens. There we go, and that's really brightening this up. It might be a little bit too bright, maybe too artificial looking. So I'll take the luminance of those greens down just a touch. There we go, make those greens a little bit darker, maybe a little bit less saturated. We're doing pretty good here. This is really coming together. I think my black points might have gotten a little bit too low. So if I turn on my clipping indicator again, I can see I have in fact lost a bit too much in here. So I'm going to take my black point and raise it back up again. And this is a very, very important part of the editing process, is back and forth, back and forth. It's very rare that you would make an adjustment, let's say to black point in this case, and never go back to it. After I make the black point adjustment, as I continue to do other adjustments, I might find that my black point needs to be changed, needs to be backed off a little bit from where I put it. So let's just take a look at a before and after of where we are so far. That is a pretty tremendous difference in there, pretty tremendous difference. I like it a lot. So I'm getting actually my first suggestion here, which is brilliant. This is a perfect suggestion. The viewer has said, I like the warm vegetation. Can I make the river and the rocks cooler in color and also make the vegetation a little cooler to emphasize the effect of the aerial haze, i.e. warmer in the foreground and cooler in the distance? I think that's a really interesting approach. Let's start by making the rocks and the water a bit cooler. And I think I'm going to do that with local adjustments. There's a few different approaches I could take here. I can try doing a local adjustment with a control point. I could try brushing. Let's try the control point and see, because I have differences in the waters and the rocks, this may not work, but let's try it. So I'm going to drop a control point on the rocks, expand this out and show the masks, and let's see what it's showing me. So that's the rock nicely selected. Actually, yeah, I could create a couple of control points and probably isolate that to the rocks pretty well. So let's do that. I'm going to add another control point there. Let's make this a little bit smaller. Add another one here. Yeah, I think that works. Now I'm going to actually add some negative control points to the trees and make sure that I'm really not getting the trees. Oops, let's add another. They're not really doing that much, but I think that's done a pretty good job of masking out this area and protecting that area. Okay, let's hide the masks. Go back to this adjustment. We'll go to white balance, And here's the white balance, and let's pull that down a little bit cooler. So here, I'll do it very dramatically so we can see what is being affected. And so I think the approach here is going to be to cool that down just a little bit. Is that too much? Actually, I think that's kind of good. Kind of like that. I dig it. I dig it. Okay, so I'm liking that. The other part of that was to make the vegetation a little cooler to emphasize the effect of the aerial haze. So maybe to do that, I would add another adjustment that's a graduated filter and just do a bottom to top and do the same thing, cool that down a little bit in the foreground. Although actually I think it should be reversed. Yeah, I think that should be reversed. So let's do that the other way. Take this up, let's say right about there, pull that down, make that a little bit cooler in the background. That's kind of cool. I think I might compensate for that a little bit by adding another control point, add another graduated filter to the bottom and go the opposite direction and make it a little bit warmer. That might be getting a little bit too much. I think that might be taking a little too far. Let's see here, let's make that really gradual. I'm not so sure like that. I like the cooling of the rocks. I don't think I liked the linear gradient. So let me just delete that one. Oops, let's select that and hit delete, select that one, hit delete. By the way, if you end up, let me actually undo that real quick. If you end up with a whole bunch of local adjustments and you're kind of lost as to where you are, look for the local adjustments palette on the right. Let's see here, where are we? Local adjustments is in here somewhere. Got so many things in here. I think I must have scrolled right past it. Where are we? Style toning, color rendering, white balance, preservation. Okay, seriously, it's in here somewhere. Selective tone, clear view, contrast, vignetting, tone curve, white balance, color accentuation, color rendering, style toning, no, HSL. I wonder if I closed it somehow. Noise reduction, lens, repair, unsharp mask, right, focus. How bizarre. I cannot find. Okay, I must have closed it somewhere along the way. So let's go to my detail palette, and I'm looking for local adjustments. Yep, sure enough, it was hidden. There we go, local adjustments, there it is. Now from here, I can see my different groups. So there's my control point group, there's the graduated filter group, and of course I already deleted that other graduated filter. Okay, but I'm gonna get rid of this one because I think it probably looked better without it. I do like the cooling of the rocks. Cooling the background didn't work for me, but there we go. Someone's saying the rocks look too dark for them. Well, if you want to lighten up the entire rocks, that's fine too. We can do that. Let's just take the entire shadow detail up. So let's scroll back up here to the selective toning and take our shadow details up a little bit. And yeah, actually, personally, I'm a fan of the darker look. Not to say right or wrong, and let's also just point out, just as a reminder, that of course we're all watching this on different screens, and so what I see on my screen is likely a little bit different than what you see on yours. I think the values of the rocks look really, really good, but if you wanted to lighten them up, simply the shadow details or your black point would be good ways to do that. It's always worth remembering that your screen is lying to you, and the only way to truly know what's happening is to look at the histogram. I see someone asking as well, where's that clipping indicator? It's right here under on the bottom left of the histogram. You have a little moon to highlight, to indicate the clipping of the shadows, and the sun one here to indicate clipping of the highlights, which reminds me, I haven't fixed those highlights yet. So let's do that next. Another local adjustment. For this, I will use a control point. Go back to positive control points here, drop one down. Let's show the mask on that. I just need a small area on there. That's fine. Hide the mask, and let's bring the exposure down a little bit. Now I could bring it way down, but it's not going to look believable. All I really want to do is pull some of that distraction out of there. Actually, it looks a little oversaturated now as well. Let's pull some saturation out of that as well. That's, here it is, saturation down just a touch. And there we go. Now it's just not as distracting. I like it. I like it. Let's see here. Let's do a little before and after. Before and after. See someone saying they're distracted by the hot spot in the top center. So I just knocked that back a little bit. Again, if I pull it back too much, it's going to look fake. If it was still bothering you, then what I would probably do is just end up cropping that. So let's turn off my crop constraint, pull that down a little bit, and let's go down maybe right about so. I don't necessarily want to crop all that out, and that could help there as well. You could also go in and do some retouching and just kind of rebuild some of the leaves in there if that's something that you really wanted to do. Someone says the leafless tree on the right of the stream is very distracting to drawing the viewer into the image. Can anything be done about this? The leafless tree on the right. If you mean this one, I actually quite like that tree. Maybe you mean this one. Ooh, could anything be done about that? I mean, that's tough. That's yeah. If that's the tree you mean, I don't think so. If this branch, if that one, you could possibly, maybe you mean this one here. I don't know quite which one you mean, but that's a level of retouching that's kind of more, it's not retouching, it's more rebuilding, reconstructing, that it's probably a bit out of range of what we could do in here. You know, with the retouching tool, the cloning tools, you can certainly do some pretty good cloning, but rebuilding something that complex, that might be a little bit out of the realm of what you could do here. At least out of my skill set. I'm not a big retoucher like that. To the right of the stream, yeah, I think that's probably the one you're talking about. Maybe this branch, maybe this one right there. There were a few questions popped up. Let me pull those back up, find that page. There we go. Okay, why do I get a camera icon with an exclamation mark on it in the customized section, and how do I fix that? See your first image in the film strip. So this indicator here, this is what the viewer is referring to, this little camera with the exclamation point. That means that there is no camera and lens profile for that camera and lens combination. Now, that will show up mostly on really, I would say, more obscure camera and lens combinations, maybe less popular ones that DxO hasn't profiled, or very, very new ones that they haven't profiled yet. In my case, that's coming up because that photo was shot with a vintage lens, with a manual lens, and so there is no profile possible. The camera does not know what the lens was, so of course DxO cannot profile for that lens, because if the camera doesn't know what it is, then obviously DxO couldn't profile for it. So that's why we're seeing it there. The only time you should see that, though, is if in a situation like this, again, there is no lens data because you're using some kind of a manual vintage lens, or the camera lens combination is very obscure or very new. Those are generally the only reasons. If you have a camera and lens combo that you believe should be supported, you're thinking, well, come on, this has been out for years, it's super popular, I know it, you can reach out to DxO. In fact, I believe from the modules, yeah, right here, from the DxO modules dropdown, there is a suggest a DxO optics module to DxO. So click on that, and then you fill in a form or whatever it asks you to do, and suggest that. You can also see there's a roadmap link here that'll show you the ones that are upcoming, so which is very handy. So if you've got something new and you want to know if that's being worked on, when it's going to come out, that will give you a clue into that. So that's what happens there. Next question, how best to treat a set of bracketed raw images in PhotoLab 3 prior to exporting to HDR Effects Pro? That's a great question. That's a big answer. There's a lot that you can do, but what I would say is to do as little as possible effectively. I would probably, and I don't really do much HDR work, so I'm not an HDR expert, but I would probably turn off any of the auto corrections, because sometimes auto corrections might be done, because they're done per image, they might be a little bit different from image to image. So I would opt to turn off all of the auto corrections. And if you're bracketed, then you shouldn't need to be making exposure adjustments. You might want to do some retouching if there's things like sensor spots that you want to get rid of. You might want to do that before, but even then, again, you could end up with some weirdness happening afterwards. I think, again, limited experience because I'm not much of an HDR person, but I think leaving the images as untouched as possible before doing the HDR merge is the best approach, and then doing all your corrective and creative work after that. I know there have been HDR webinars. I haven't done them because, again, it's not really my thing, but I would encourage you to watch some of those because I'm sure that topic has been covered in those. Excuse me, the next question, can the left panel and the bottom panel be closed? It would make for a larger photo. So you can certainly close the bottom panel, just pull that down, there we go. The left panel, I can make this a little bit smaller, can I? Oh yeah, there we go, I can. It's funny, I never do that. Yeah, so the bar right here, click on that bar and it will do it. I believe if I hit tab at this point, yeah, if I hit tab, they both hide. That's funny, I never even looked to see if I could hide just one of them, but there you go. Excellent. Oh, I love easy answers. Last one, can you use the HSL tool with the control points to fine tune the color? No, The HSL tool does not work in combination with the control points. So that is feedback that I'm sure DxO would love to hear. Keep in mind, HSL tool is new as of this major version of PhotoLab. So features like that you would like to see, by all means, give them the feedback. I know it's, I say this a lot to people. I know it's very easy to assume that somebody else has made that feedback, and someone else probably has. But if a software company hears a request from a dozen users versus hearing it from 10,000 users, they're much more likely to go after the one that 10,000 people asked for. So even though you know without a doubt this is so obvious, of course they're going to do that, assume nothing. Ask for it, because the more people ask, the more likely it's going to get addressed. And that goes for anything, any software, any hardware, anything. It's the way that works. Okay, let's move on to the next image, shall we? All right, let's see here. Let's open this up, and I'm going to, I was going to do this image next, but I've already covered by request some of the things I was going to talk about in here. So I'm going to go to this photo. If we have time, we'll come back to that other one. Okay, so this image, reset that back to the processed by PhotoLab. As I compare that, we see there's not a massive amount of change, but you can see a little bit of curvature correction happening as I toggle that back and forth. We can also see, this is the no corrections version. The sun is a bit more blown out. Here we've brought some more detail back in. So interesting. Okay, not a whole lot changed, but there's been some. Now, this is one of those photos where you could take it in multiple directions, really. I could bring back a lot of the contrast that is lost because I'm pointing right into the sun. I could lean into this and make it a lower contrast, kind of a brighter, airier image. I can lean into the warmth on this and really pull the warmth in on a greater scale. I can take the clouds up here and make them more enhanced, make them more storm cloud looking, or send them back a little bit and make them a little bit less dramatic. I've got the reflection of the river down here, which I might want to enhance a little bit. So there's a lot of different ways that I can go. Now, as with the bright spot on the leaves that we saw in the first image, it's often very useful to just take the exposure slider and drag it around to see what is there, just so you know what you're working with. So let's start by taking the exposure way down. As I do that, I can see in my clouds that I've got a lot of detail in there that I can pull in. There is a point, of course, where I have no detail in the sun, so it's good to know what is and isn't there. Okay, that's good to know. Let's go the other way. Do I have a bunch of detail in the trees here? There's definitely some in there that I might be able to pull up. But, you know, of course, shooting straight into the sun like this is definitely wiping out a lot of detail and contrast. So I think that I'm going to kind of lean into that. Let me start with micro contrast. I want to see if I can pull some more detail into the grass in here that's kind of being backlit by the sun. So let's go for contrast, micro contrast, and let's just take that up a bit. If I go too high, I mean, let me overdo it. You can really see it has brought a lot of detail into the grass in there, but it's done some pretty awful things, I think, to the clouds and to the trees in here. So I definitely don't want to go that high on there, but taking it up a little bit might be good. So let's take it up just a touch. Let's bring some saturation back into this a little bit of saturation in to the green. That's nice. That's really enhancing the yellows and the greens in there in a nice way. Kind of like that, kind of like that. Okay, let's see here. What else we want to do? Let's just take a look at my shadow and highlight controls and see what I may or may not want to lift or crush from here. So if I pull my shadows up, leaning in again to that kind of washed out look might look good. If I pull it down, yeah, I don't think I want to go the other way. I don't think I want to go darker, maybe a tiny bit actually. I do kind of like the cows becoming almost silhouetted in there. Actually, I do kind of like that. Let me do a quick comparison. Always a good idea. Jump back and forth between the comparisons, see what's happening there, see what you like. Okay, I'm kind of digging that, All right, let's focus on the sky for a moment. I'm gonna go local adjustments and let's do a graduated filter, pull down from the top, and let's see what direction I might want to go here. Do I want to, not vibrancy, I meant to go to exposure here. Let's go back to that. Do I want to darken the sky, more dramatic? Do I want to lighten it up, kind of wash it out a little bit? I think I'm gonna go for the slightly lighter version. Kind of like pumping that up a little bit. We're not trying to make it look like a stormy day. I'm gonna pop that up just a little bit. Okay, I'm digging that. Let me now see if I can really amplify this sun a bit. So let's go and create another new mask. Looking at the sun here, let's right click on there and do a control point right in the middle of the sun. And then let's take the exposure up. Yeah, I like this actually. Really, again, leaning into this idea of that blown out sky. I'm gonna pump that up, and then let's try this. Let me go to the warmth and crank that up. Oh yeah, really add some warmth. Now if I go too high, it just starts to look fake. But let's just really bring some warmth up into that. Maybe make this a little bit bigger. I'm digging that. I'm liking that actually quite a lot. Okay, let's get out of here. Compare there. So we've got, don't forget, give me some ideas of what you guys want to see. I would love to hear what you guys want to see on this image, but I like the direction this is going. I've really amplified the greens and the yellows in the grass. That looks nice. I like that big bright spot in the sun that we're getting back there. I'm digging that. I think I might actually want to darken these hills a little bit. Let's see how that works. Let's go into local adjustments. I'm just going to create a new mask. I'm going to do a brush. Good old school. Let's just grab a brush in here and kind of just brush across there. And let's just take the exposure down on that a little bit. Oop, too much. Just a little bit, just a touch. Yeah, I like that. Sometimes, you know, a good old brush, just simple, old school. Keep it easy, keep it simple. Let's see if I can do anything to the foreground in here. I'm going to do another graduated filter across the foreground. Maybe I want to pump some enhancement into the reflection in there. Let's get a little bit of micro contrast. Pump that up a little bit. Subtle, but I like it. I like it. Okay, digging it. All right, looking over at my questions coming up, someone asked if I ever use ClearView. I do sometimes. Actually, you know what? This is a good point. ClearView here, going opposite, negative ClearView, might add a little bit of haze in here that will actually enhance things. So let's take a look at ClearView. That's a great idea. Let's see here, smart lighting, selective tone, ClearView Plus, there she is. So ClearView, if you're not familiar with it, the idea behind ClearView is to cut through haze. So before I even do anything to this photo, which I guess it's not really gonna work on either of those other photos there, but the idea with ClearView is you cut through the haze. So if I crank this up, you'll see how it's really enhancing that sky, kind of like the micro contrast. I actually quite like what it's done to the grass in here, come to think of it. Actually quite like that. I was going to suggest going the opposite direction to soften things up, which I think looks nice in the background in there, but I kind of like the clear view on the grass. So maybe I will go add that just a little bit, just a touch. You don't want to go crazy, just a touch in there. I dig it. I kind of like it. Okay, we're going to do that. What can you do about the sunlight artifacts in the grass in the foreground? You're talking about the lens flares right here. I personally like the lens flares. That's something that I specifically pointed the lens to get. But if you don't like them, that's okay. I won't be offended. Let's go in there and get rid of those. Let's do a little retouching. Bring up the Band-Aid tool. Bring up the repair. Now let's see, there's 3 of them in here. There is 2 methods of working on this. There's the repair and the cloning. I'm just going to start with the repair. Let's make this nice and feathered, make that a little bit smaller. I'm adjusting the brush size by scrolling the mouse with the command key held down, adjusts the size. With the shift key held down, adjust the softness. I want this pretty soft in there, and we'll make this about a little bit smaller. Maybe not quite that soft. Let's go like so, a little smaller, and just kind of click over that, and let's see what happens. Move this down, and let's hide the masks. That was all right. Yeah, actually, that worked out pretty well. Okay, that's gone. All right, let's get rid of this one and let it think. It's funny because sometimes it grabs from clearly the wrong area. So let's just say, let's grab from here instead and see what that looks like. I think let me delete that. I'm going to make this a little bit softer and a little bit smaller, and then paint over this area a little bit more deliberately. See how that works out. Pull the source from right under it right here. And my system is slowing down. There we go. There we go. That's working. It's coming together. Yeah, maybe a little bit extra cleanup. Let's pile up the cleanup. Let's add a little cleanup on top of that there. I know there's one more flare in here. I think we're getting the idea. I don't need to go through all of them, but let's see here. Let's show the masks. It's not really picking the best spots today. So let's pick from down here and hide those masks. Let it draw, correction preview. It's thinking. And there we go. It's getting there. Hey, a little bit more work is needed in there, but we're getting there. We're getting closer. So that is the approach that I would take. But again, for me personally, I kind of like the lens flares. I intended those to be there. So I'm going to put them back in because it's my photo. No, that's just, I think the lens flares look really nice in there. So let's just reset that cloning, bring that back to the way it was, and away we go. But that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. And that is exactly how I would take care of that. Can you do micro contrast as a local adjustment? I think you can. Let me jump back into there. I believe that you can do that. Software is thinking very hard right now. I can hear my system spinning up. There we go. This is, by the way, quite a high resolution image, so perhaps not the greatest sample size to demo from because it is so big. 50 megapixels definitely taxing the system, but hey, that's real world sometimes. All right, let me see here. Let's do, the question is micro contrast on the adjustments in here. So yes, micro contrast right there. So let's do, if you wanted to add a micro contrast, say to the grass on its own, actually I probably wouldn't use a control point. I would probably use a brush. Let's try a brush with auto mask. Let's just make this really big. Right, command key, make that really big. Let's just auto mask over the grass in there, and then take the micro contrast and crank that up a little bit. And is it doing anything? Oh, yeah, there it goes. So there, that's one way to do that. So yes, you can add micro contrast into local adjustments. Can you try to match the sky with the river? Okay. Oh, I like that idea. That's a good one. All right, let's do this. Let's create a new, actually, I think that do I want to use the auto mask brush? That might be a good idea. It might be a terrible idea. Let's find out. I'm going to click in the blue. This, yeah, we're going to find, oops, undo. I need to create a new mask first. Let's do a whole new mask. And in fact, let me just remind you of this too, since I'm going to do this myself so I don't get confused here. If I look at my local adjustments, I have a bunch of them in here now. I have no idea what half of these are anymore. So let's see here. That auto mask was the grass. So I'm just going to double click on that, rename it, grass enhancement. Let's see here. That graduated filter was the water. So that was just water. I don't remember what I did there. Water general, we'll just call it that. This brush was the trees in the background. So background trees. Just this way I know what each one is. That was the sun, and graduated filter was the sky. Okay, cool. So just keeping track. All right, so now I want to do a auto mask. I'm on a new layer, right? New mask over the blue. So I start by clicking on the blue, and then we just kind of drag all over everything in here. And let's see what we get. Something tells me this is not going to work very well, but we're going to find out. And then you want to make it match. So we need to make it a little bit lighter, a little bit less saturated. Take the saturation down a little bit. And we need to make it a little bit lighter. Exposure up a bit. And are we seeing much happening here? Or is it still thinking? There we go, still thinking. There it goes. Actually, what? That worked better than I expected it to. I must be honest. That worked better than I thought it would. Little desaturation, maybe still a little bit more desaturation. That top sky is pretty faded. Let's pull that saturation down a little bit more. And that worked. I think that worked out quite well. Auto mask here, let's toggle that on and off. It is taking a little while to redraw. I'll have to remember not to use 50 megapixel images in my next demos. But that's making a pretty nice little subtle adjustment there. I dig it. Yeah, there's the before, there's the after. Nice. Okay, very good, very good. Last question on here, last one on here was, I love the water, but I wonder if a crop above the water would remove what seems to be a distraction. Let's try it. I like the water too, but let's try it because, you know, you never know. Into the crop tool, let's disable the crop constrained aspect ratio and just crop that like so. Close that and see what you think. I'm gonna go with I like the water. I like the water, but you never know until you try it. And if you prefer it without the water, then by all means, that's the way you should do it. I dig it. I dig it. Okay, cool. Let's just move to the next photo, and then we'll hit any final questions at the end here. So that's a big picture. All right, let me move to this one here, because in this one, I'm actually going to take this into one of the filters, into one of the Nik Collection filters as well. So let's close that. And all right, so first of all, let's talk about this photo. Let me actually open this back up, and we can see the metadata on here. This is 51,000 ISO photo. So this is a big old honking noisy picture. It's actually not that noisy, all things considered, if we zoom into it. But here's the truth about it. Let me turn off the corrections. Let's go for no correction on here, and let's see how noisy it actually is. That's the native raw file. So you can see now, and I'm just going to let the screen sit here for a moment just to make sure you can really see it and it really comes through the GoToWebinar interface. That is a very noisy image, understandably so. It's very high ISO, but look at the color noise in there. Now, when I hit the reset button, it is going to do its base correction and eliminate the vast majority of that noise. Now, if I go to my noise controls, let's see here, I keep collapsing these things to make room, and then I can't find them again. Local adjustments, so we don't need you right now. Horizon crop distortion vignette. But I'm going to repair. The feeling that I need to just do a reset on my palettes here. I've moved things around so much I don't know where anything is anymore. Contrast vignette, tone curve. I don't even know. Just go to light, turn on noise. Noise reduction. Okay, here we go. Noise reduction, there it is. Okay, so you have by default something called HQ, high quality, fast. That's what's applied by default. That's what we're seeing right now. I can choose where I want to preview this. Let's just put it over her eye. That's always a good spot to look at. And we can see the amount of noise reduction that has been applied to the image, and we see it here as well. You can also do something called prime. Prime is one of the most, I'd say the most effective, the most dramatic features about PhotoLab is prime noise reduction. It does an absolutely incredible level of noise reduction. And you see this right now in this preview. The image does not look fake. It doesn't look like it's overdone. It just looks cleaner. Now, you are only seeing this in the preview. You're not going to see this on the main screen, and you will only see this on the whole image once you export it. This prime noise reduction can only be applied on export, and it will increase the export time quite a bit actually, but that's how that works. So we're going to leave that on for that final export. Okay, let's zoom back out. This girl here is out of focus. She's got a funny look on her face. Lights on her is bad. I don't like that. So, but I like this part of the photo. So I'm going to go into my crop, and I'm just going to crop the heck out of this. And I'm actually going to, instead of cropping it at the native aspect ratio of 2:3, I want to rotate that to 3:2. Now you'll notice this is kind of fun. If I drag the mouse far enough, boom, there you go, it switches aspect ratio. So there's a vertical and there's a horizontal. If you want a very specific aspect ratio, you can actually do that. If I go to my crop tool, here we go, aspect ratio, I can type in here whatever I want. So I could type in, I don't know, let's do like a 2:5. Let's just make it really dramatic. I can just type that in and I'll get that aspect ratio. So you can literally type in whatever you want. If I want to go back to the original, which is a 3:2, but then rotate that to a 2:3, all I have to do is drag the mouse. Okay, so let's get that in place. We're going to crop this so we get the girl, we get the chain, and then I'm going to give up on the 2:3 crop because I definitely want to get the hands in here. So I'm going to say unconstrained crop. Let's stretch that back out. Maybe bring that a little bit. We'll go get her elbow in there, maybe pull this down on her head a little bit. And yeah, we've cropped quite a bit of the image, but it's definitely better. Okay, so for this photo, I want to take this into another filter to have some fun with it. So let's take this into, where are we? Oop, I need my tools here. There we go, into the Nik Collection. We're going to take this into, let's go analog effects. Let's see what we can do in analog effects. That's always fun. There's a question that came up. I'm going to address this now while we're waiting for this to open. What does the unsharp mask actually do in comparison to lens sharpening, which is automatically applied? Would both methods applied simultaneously be too much of a sharpening effect? Wonderful question. Okay, lens sharpening is unique, specific to that lens profile, to that lens itself. This is something that has been profiled by PhotoLab. They have essentially looked at it and determined this lens isn't as sharp as it could be, so we're going to add a little bit of sharpness to the lens profile. Unsharp mask is a global overall sharpening of the image, and that absolutely can and should be used in combination with the lens sharpening. So lens sharpening, for the most part, you just leave it alone, leave it at its default. Unsharp mask is for manual control over the sharpening effect. So yes, absolutely do. The way that unsharp masking works is looking for contrast areas, fine detail contrast, and enhancing the contrast along those edges, which is different than lens profiling, and I couldn't give you a scientific explanation of how lens profiling works, but it is a bit different than that. Okay, so presets. We're gonna start with presets. You know, just try a few different ones. Just click on classic camera. Let's see what this looks like. You know, take a moment to render out. Let it calculate itself. Oh, that's actually kind of cool, kind of warm, kind of neat. Let's go to this next one. See what this looks like. Another classic camera effect. I love playing with these filters just to get inspiration, to get ideas on what you can do. Kind of cool. Got a little bit of grit going on in there. Kind of goes with the gritty theme of the image. Actually, I quite like that. It's kind of fun. It's kind of cool. Let's take a look at the film types in here. There's all these colors. I like the coolness that this is gaining, but I think I want to lean into that. I want to get a little bit more of it. I like the faded blacks. I like the cool effect on there. That's looking pretty good. I like the dirt. Let's actually do a little bit more dirt and scratches. There's all these different dirt and scratch layers that I can add to it. Just try some different ones in here, see what we get. Okay, that's terrible. A little bit too much on there. Try another one. It's all about the experimentation. It's all about just finding that right look. Incidentally, we are coming to the end of our time, folks. We've got about 5 more minutes. If you have any other questions, do drop them in, or lickety split quick, and I'll do my best to answer them before we run out of time today. I love this part of it. I love this aspect of playing with the images, playing with the different ideas in here. Let's go into the basic adjustments and see what else we've got in here. Maybe add a little bit more colors, put a little saturation back into that. Oh, I like how that works. It's really bringing some of the warmth into the highlights and leaving the shadows cool. Looks pretty good. Very good. Now remember, you've got control points in here as well, so you could enhance specific areas. So let's say I want to drop a control point on her face, and let's take the saturation up on her face to bring some color back into her skin. Or maybe I want to go the other direction, take saturation out, or lower the contrast, and that's going to be specific to that part of the image, which is just really makes the whole thing so much more powerful. I dig it. I like it. Let's just save that. Let's save that. Look at the difference. I mean, there's such a huge difference from where we started. Let me, I'm going to reset the original before I made the basic changes. And let's see, let's go back to this one. Let's do a reset on that. And just to compare from where we went from there to there, really just adds a whole lot to it. I'd like it a lot. I love this approach to it, just really being able to go in there and play, jumping into the filters. Maybe you end up doing some corrective work that you throw away at the end, and that's pretty cool too. But you know, you do what you do. You got to play with an experiment. I did want to show one thing that since I skipped this picture, I wanted to show this to you. I'm going to zoom into these headlamps in here, and I wanted to show you the purple defringing. So we can see in here, let's get a little bit closer. Let's go 200%. We're getting a lot of fringing around here. This is the lens that was used. This lens was the Panasonic Leica Summilux 25mm f1.4 lens, which unfortunately, even though it's a Leica lens, it does have quite a bit of purple fringing that's going on in here. So if you run into this, look under your, look under the lens. Where are we? Vignette distortion. Where did we go? Chromatic aberration. There it is. There's your chromatic aberration. If I turn this off, we'll actually see this get enhanced. It's a little bit more, but chromatic aberration goes for some pretty subtle things. This is so big that we need more. There's actually a checkbox called purple fringe. Now, when I enable that, for this one, it does reduce it, but it doesn't eliminate it completely. So what I may need to do is play with the intensity or the size of the adjustment in here, and their size is doing a pretty good job of taking that out. So that really helps in there. Another little trick in here, let's just say, for the sake of the demo, that was the best that I could get out of it. Or perhaps by adjusting the size, it was messing up some other part of the image. Here's a little trick. Local adjustments. Let's create a control point, drop a really little one right over that purple in there. Let's show the masks. So we'll make sure we're getting just the purple part of it. And let's say right about there. And then take the saturation on that and pull that down. And we're going to need to expand a little bit. We might actually need more than one control point in there. Let's add another control point. There we go. Boom, look at that. Desaturated out that purple fringe in there. So now you see the difference between the left and the right. It really pulls that out. There's so many different approaches to that, but the desaturation of the purple fringe, and maybe you decide to do it with a brush, maybe you decide to do it with a gradient, whatever works for the photo that you've got, that can be a great approach to getting rid of a problem like that. All right, I think that is everything. Oh, someone's asking if there's a history panel. There is not. You know, that's so funny. The things that you never even look at. No, sorry, I had to look that up because I wanted to make sure that I gave you the right answer. No, there is no history panel inside of PhotoLab, but it is all non-destructive. So no matter what you do, you can go back and turn anything off at any time. It's not like a Photoshop. You know, you brush, you do something else, and then you do something else. Unless you were building all that in layers, you would have to step back through all of them. You don't need the history panel in that regard because everything that you did can be undone at any time, right? If I go into here and I've done a ton of work on this, and then I decide, you know, I really don't like that defringing that I just did up there, I can just go in here, that manual defringing, I can go in here and find the local adjustments and just delete it. So here we go, local adjustments, open that up. I can just select that and delete it at any time, and no harm, no foul, because it was totally non-destructive and can be changed at any time. Okay, a couple questions coming up. I'm gonna have to go real quick here, but let's see, a couple last questions. Do you always go to Nik Collection before you export the image? No, not at all. Just depends on what I'm doing with the image. You know, if I'm looking for that kind of cool creative film look, then I'll go into the analog effects like I did here, or maybe into color effects to apply a film type layer to it. One black and white, of course, I'm going to go into Nik Silver Effects Pro because that's just amazing. But no, it's definitely not an always. It really just depends on the image. Okay, last question: how to fix corners in a rotated image without crop, keeping as much image details as possible. Copy correction fails in those corners. So if you've rotated an image and you now have empty space around them, you either have to crop into it or go in and manually reconstruct those areas. There's not really any way around that because the data simply doesn't exist. So either crop past it or manually rebuild it, retouch it, which can, depending on the image, might be easy to do. If it's just like a corner of a sky, that's easy to fill that in. But of course, if it's a tree, you might have a hard time rebuilding a tree. So that's that. Okay, folks, thank you so much again for tuning in today. I really appreciate that. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.